Hello, everyone. Hi. So, thank you for joining us for the Healthcare Innovation in Times of COVID-19 webinar organized by Catalyst. So, before we begin, let me just say a few words to introduce Catalyst. So, Catalyst is unique in being clinician-led. It's a co-working space that brings together doctors, engineers, investors, industry, and everyone else relevant in the MedTech ecosystem. And it seeks to build useful products. So if you're interested in MedTech and you'd like to learn about clinical innovation, or you'd like to connect with partners that are important for a startup, then do consider joining Catalyst, and you can find out more about them at www.thecatalyst.sg. So that's www.thecatalyst.sg. Nice to meet you. I'm Paul, and I'm your host for today. Usually I work as a medical officer in the Department of Infectious Diseases in SGH, but in my spare time, I also produce a podcast called Alternative CV, in which I introduce and interview Asians who have pursued unconventional careers, hobbies, or projects beyond their typical professional jobs, which you can find on Spotify, Apple, or Google Podcasts. I'll be your moderator for today, and in a moment, I'll introduce our esteemed guests. But before we begin, let me give a brief introduction about how today's webinar will work. So if you're looking at this from your phone or from your PC, you can see a tab that says Q&A somewhere towards the top or the right of your screen. And if you have a question, that's where you go to type it in. And you can see that we already have some questions there. You can also upvote some questions that you think are useful and that you'd like to see answered. Okay, so that's all we need to get started. The Q&A panel in the top right, and that's where you go to ask your questions. So without further ado, let me introduce our guests. Our first guest is an oncologist and also the CEO and founder of Lucence. Lucence is one of the hottest startups in the Singapore biotech scene, and it's known for its liquid biopsy technology, which detects circulating tumor DNA, which is shed into the bloodstream to provide a revolutionary, non-invasive way to diagnose cancer. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Tan Min Han. Hi, Dr. Min Han.
Hello, hi. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
And our other guest is a self-described surgeon innovator. He was part of the first team of Stanford Singapore Biodesign Fellows. And since then, he's been involved in a range of MedTech projects, including the development of the Mona Lisa robotic device for automated transperineal prostate biopsies. He was also instrumental in setting up the Medical Technology Office in SingHealth, where he's held the position of director from 2012 till now. So please welcome Assistant Professor Henry Ho. Hi, Dr. Henry.
Hello, hi everyone. Henry here. Good to join this session. Looking forward to having some great conversation.
Great. So I thought that maybe we'll just get the ball rolling by talking a little bit about the COVID-19 related projects that you might be involved in. And Min Han, if you don't mind, we'll start with you. So I understand that with Lucence, you've developed this SAFER kit, which stands for Stabilization of Nucleic Acid Formulation for Evaluation of RNA. And essentially, it allows the RNA that's collected on a swab to be transported over long distances without the need for refrigeration. Would you mind telling us a little bit about that, as well as maybe some other projects related to mass testing that you or Lucence might have ongoing?
I'm happy to discuss the development of the SAFER project. And I want to first describe the problem as I see it, which is that there is a major bottleneck and at the swabbing aspect of things. Today, the status quo is that we have swabbers, we have an invasive procedure, we have a real bottleneck in obtaining knowledge and information. And I think these bottlenecks are also what's responsible for holding back the testing capacity. And at this moment, the ability to deliver solutions may allow for safer testing. It could allow for the preservation of precious PPE for hospital care where it's really needed. And I think there are a lot of developments surrounding the use of non-invasive approaches like saliva. And in looking at this problem, I thought that we had a traditional focus on very strong services in terms of very sensitive testing for both cancer and viruses. And Lucence is actually the first company in the world to have delivered a test spanning cancer-causing viruses as well as cancer mutations. The use of saliva was not unknown to us because if we look at head and neck cancers, where human papilloma virus is present in oral secretions, we figured that the stabilization and capture of COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2 virus in saliva, a non-invasive approach would make a lot of sense. And the chemistry, we looked in-house and we realized that we had, already developed, strong technology for RNA viruses. This was a process of taking it forward, validating this, establishing its safety. And I think today, all around the world, many cities are evaluating. Some have already adopted saliva as the primary approach towards COVID-19 diagnosis. And I think this is where innovation really can help to look at how such problems and bottlenecks can be resolved for more effective testing. So today, I think all around the world, taking saliva diagnostics forward, ourselves as well as other innovators, we are establishing that evidence, and we are seeing publications in the last, couple of weeks from Yale, from UCLA, Hong Kong. These are all ongoing right now as we speak.
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, some really interesting points that you brought up about both defining the problem and then also looking in-house as to your strengths, which you could capitalize on. And I'm sure that these are themes that we'll come back to. But in the meantime, let's go over to Henry. Henry, from your position as the Director of Singapore Medical Technology Office, could you kind of paint us a picture of what you see are the opportunities for innovation during this time, and perhaps also describe some of the interesting projects that you might have come across?
Right. Thanks, Paul. I think one of the key things that's coming from the hospital's perspective for innovation in this period of COVID, where I would label it as almost a crisis innovation, is really about the time where you are having a kind of a lead time in terms of when we happen in around the February period, when we start to see the cases in China. And we start beginning to wonder, will that ever happen to Singapore? And those are some kind of little hints of where the landscape or trends might look like in terms of what the needs of the healthcare system might be. And really, in terms of when this actual entire situation kind of land into Singapore or as a whole, everybody goes into this frenzy mode. And one of the key things that we in the hospital in terms of innovation look to is actually the pace. The pace is really intense. That's one thing that I can expand on that point a little bit later if you want to. And number two is about the scale. I think this is where the task or the magnitude is something that not many of us are used to. And that's another issue that I think is the type of innovation we may look like for, especially in this period where COVID is going on. And finally, it's also about how do we actually solve some of the problem in an unconventional manner. And the things that Minhan is doing is really going above and be a game changer of how we can actually make things a little bit different than trying to do more of the same. I think those are the three key feature of how what I call in terms of the crisis innovation would look like, and how we can actually solve a problem that's really dire and is right in front of our current situation.
Great. If you don't mind, can we dig into that a little bit more? So you mentioned pace and scale. Could you elaborate more on what you mean by that?
Yeah, so I think when we talk about pace, we refer to the fact that the urgency of the situation is developing rapidly every single day. When we talk about rapidly, we're referring to that the number of cases are going up, the responses, the protection of the other people around them, and the healthcare system will need to respond in a very hastily manner, quickly. So those are the pace of events, and therefore, unfortunately, a lot of time when we talk about innovation and the way the usual innovation is being done, where we actually first need to seek funding, get permission, go through the usual trials, and those things in the times like this, in terms of crisis innovation, everything is confluence or merge into one absolute point where everybody has to put in their chip into the entire workflow of how things are being done. And therefore, I realized in terms of pace, we actually need to kind of bring everybody, every stakeholder, be it the innovator, the so-called the funder, even the hospital administrator, and the clinicians, the doctors, and even the administrator to come in together and sit there. Look, we have a very tight timeline. We have to work on this together. I think that's something that will probably help to kind of like outdo this intense pace that in terms of innovation has to be done in a crisis like COVID-19.
Okay, great. Before we go any further, let me just once again reiterate that you can submit your questions at any point in time. Again, it's the Q&A panel on the right hand side if you're using a laptop device. And I'm sure that as we go along and we throw out more points for discussion, that would generate more ideas. So I can see from the Q&A that quite a few people are thinking about what opportunities there are for COVID-19 response. And as you were talking about, Henry, you're saying that there are a number that this global crisis is of a scale we've never seen before. And Min Han, you were talking about the importance of testing as the bottleneck. So let me throw it back to you, Min Han, if you don't mind. Besides, could you elaborate a bit more about what you mean by testing as the bottleneck? And beyond testing, are there any other places where you see other potential bottlenecks where, there might be a benefit, the greatest benefit of innovation in that space?
I want to first echo Henry's comment about speed and scale, because never in the history of, I think, many countries has design, development, manufacturing, regulatory approval, and everything. Never has this been compressed to within 3 to 4 weeks, right? So we are looking at a situation where, because of the demands of the world around us, that these so-called processes that are normally run in a certain way, these have been dramatically accelerated. And it's probably for the best, because, the world is, we are responding to the challenges around us. Focusing on the question of therefore testing, which has also come under the spotlight, everyone is able now to tell you what's a false positive, false negative, what's a swab. Never you would imagine 3 months, 4 months ago that your average person on the street could go through the details of how this happens. And I think medical diagnostics has really come under the spotlight during this period. WHO says test, test, test. And I would say it's clear that, the answers are going to be out there between government, industry, academia, clinicians. And I think everyone is, and every city is going to be trying to decide what's best for its resources, as well as its own ability to manage the bottlenecks. So I think what we have learned, at least in this journey, is firstly, I think innovation is everywhere. Hong Kong, for example, has adopted saliva testing since February. And this is the majority of samples in Hong Kong. I think there are obviously the evidence generation will need to happen in the various cities out there, including the United States and in Singapore, as well as in the region. I think everyone is united by the same goal of how do we resolve the several parts of the bottlenecks here. And these include swabbing, it includes the transport, even cooling of that. These are the things that people don't necessarily immediately think about. Sample receipt and processing at the point of the lab. There is also the PCR step, which is also, there are bottlenecks of equipment, reagents, as well as skilled manpower and automation. And finally, the process of reporting that in a timely fashion. And so a test isn't just a test. A great test is nothing without a good sample. And the impression that the that many people have, which is, oh, it's a serology, oh, it's a pinprick. It's not quite like that. It's really every part of that value chain, whether who produces what part of this, all these have for the first time come under the spotlight. Availability of various parts. And I think all around this region, including in Singapore, I think every lab, every front end is looking at all this, right? The swabs, the media, and for the audience, and I think many of the questions center on where the innovation is. Everywhere is an opportunity for innovation because the needs are so great in restoring Singapore's economy, in restoring life back to normal.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, optimizing every single step along that chain. And as you were saying, it seems like, restoring Singapore back to normal is predicated on an effective testing strategy. Henry, anything to add about this? Because I'm sure that you have mulled about the problem of testing yourself, or seen developments in this area.
So I think on the note on testing, back to marry to the point about testing is about the scaling of testing. In fact, one of the area that, we have always taken for granted is about a simple thing like just doing a swabbing test. The amount of logistics behind to execute that is tremendous. And that brings me to the point about the scale of things. And that's something that a lot of time people did not appreciate the logistics needed to actually do a simple test. And many of us actually found that we may want to do the test and do the screening, but unfortunately, the scale of the matter is not able to cope to execute that goal. So that's the reason why I think in this particular moment where we have to look into our logistical innovation, to how to actually support that kind of goal is also a very revealing in terms of this period of crisis. In fact, I would like to actually also emphasize the point that this whole exercises has actually exposes our weaknesses in terms of where our logistical gaps might be. And that's something that we may want to take away in terms of lessons learned, in terms of how do we actually improve ourselves in terms of those gaps that we have uncovered during this period of the crisis innovation.
Okay. My question really is about the fact that because Catalyst is mostly clinician run, right? And I think that's its strength. But as clinicians, perhaps we only see a certain portion of the entire journey, which we are highlighting. We only see perhaps a sharp end of the spear where, people put the swab stick into somebody's mouths, but we don't really see the whole back end logistics processes and all the nitty gritty details and all the opportunities for innovation there. So how would you go about finding problems in that space and working with, say, partners, with industry partners to optimize those processes, especially if we are innovators who want to make a tangible difference, for either one of you?
Maybe I'll just start off here, just to give the audience an example of the little things that we take for granted. The swab stick. Everybody thinks a swab stick is just like a satay stick that you have spear into a cotton bud, But in truth of the matter, if you really want to study the entire swab stick in detail, it's a very beautifully invented device by itself. It actually need to be slim in certain area where it goes into the nostril, and at the same time, it must have strength at the end of it to allow it to hold on to the cotton bud, and then at the same time,
we might have lost Dr. Ho there. Okay, so whilst we are trying to get Dr. Ho back online, maybe I'll have to pitch a question to Min Han instead.
No worries. I think Henry was, to follow on Henry's point, he was describing how much thinking, how much engineering, and consideration of the user needs really have to go into something as humble as the swab stick. And I and I work closely with the engineers who work on 3D printing and all that, and it's really true. The amount of time and thinking in every single part of every device and that we have in front of us, it's tremendous, and it goes into all kinds of value chains that and supply chains that we cannot even imagine. And on my table right now, I mean, if we are looking at, say, even the humble pen, right? The pen is made up of many different components which may be manufactured in different places and assembled. With this crisis and its attendant challenges, it's the stockpiling, the fact that supply chains have been sort of interrupted. It highlights the vulnerability of any healthcare system out there to these unexpected events. I'm sure Henry has a lot of insights from his his overview of a large organization. I mean, we speak as not just as a saliva kit testing. We are a COVID-19 service lab. We are a COVID-19 service lab licensed in Singapore. And I would say that in this process, we procure swabs, we procure media, and in each of these, we have seen unexpected delays in shipment. Your question on the fact, on your question on what are the clinicians' contributions to this, I'm going to say clinicians are absolutely crucial in defining the needs and the problems and working together both with the frontline clinicians, and there are also clinicians in the back at the behind the front line, such as pathologists, microbiologists, and their views certainly drive a lot of the sort of the optimal actions of any healthcare system. So I'll say I think that's roughly what some of the lessons we learned. Henry will have more. I'm not sure if he's back online.
Yeah. Not yet, but yeah, we are working on it. Yep. Thank you, Min Han. I'm going to pivot slightly to another question which we have here by Yang, who asked for investors, trying to get investors on board to support an idea because some of these ideas seem a little bit niche. Where would you go to get support for these ideas, especially if it involves, say, specifics to do with, PCR or things which might, I think that's the nature of the question. MedTech is specialized and might not be accessible to most investors. Where do you go and get the support for these ideas, bearing in mind the need to move quickly as we talked about before?
I think it sounds like the question is targeted towards seeking support from commercial, non-medical people. And I'm going to say first that I think a solution of course needs to be paired with the resources to drive, to invent, to scale up any such invention. I think Catalyst would be an opportunity for those conversations to come together, because obviously, investors want, great ideas and workable ideas to happen. I would say maybe Paul can comment on how Catalyst can play a part here, because it takes a community. It's not just the clinician, it's also the government, it's also the investor. And maybe I can hear this question should be best posed to Paul. How can Catalyst play a role in that?
So Catalyst offers things like, for example, startup clinics, and also it matches together kind of like speed dating, where you pitch your ideas to people who are in the industry or who might be looking for solutions, and also vice versa, where people in the industry have some problems that they would like clinician feedback on. And so it's that matching of needs and wants, really. Needs and the solutions. So yeah, places like Catalyst do help, definitely. Yeah.
So it sounds like, to answer that question, Catalyst is going to invite investors with medical and biological knowledge.
Yes, I'm sure we can follow up on that offline, and we will leave that to the Catalyst organizers to to send you emails afterwards, and we'll see what they have in store. Let me just check back on the questions. Okay, so a question from Howard, who says, from a molecular biology point of view, PCR seems to be quite a low throughput method because it generates a bottleneck of testing. If we wanted to obtain samples in larger quantities, like what we were talking about just now, the scale, are there any other alternative, trying to be creative here, other more high throughput methods besides just RT-PCR?
So this is a great question, and I'm going to define this as what I call the 100K challenge, which is how can a single center or a single lab achieve 100,000 tests a day. And I'm going to say this is in the light where the United States, the whole United States has about 300,000 tests a day. But at the same time, we also recognize the ability of Wuhan to deliver 10 million tests in 10 days. So I'm going to say the approach to this mass testing is going to take place in two ways. One, there is the front end question of how pooling can be done effectively without loss of sensitivity. And I'm going to say this has been a strategy used in China, in Germany, in Israel, and various other places. This pooling strategy works only in places where the case prevalence is low. So it's possible to pool, say, 10 swabs in one tube, for example, or 5 swabs in one tube. So pooling is going to be a key possibility for this. Now, from a technology perspective, I think there are 3 different major approaches at the moment. And I'm going to first say that each of these 3 approaches towards mass testing needs to see considerable technical improvement before they can be considered as solutions. They include, of course, both antigen antibody testing, which is still not clearly sensitive enough to meet the needs. However, there is one more approach which seems to fulfill that capability, but needs stronger technical validation, and that's next generation sequencing. I think next generation sequencing is essentially how many advanced genetic tests today are done, such as, for example, the BRCA gene, the Angelina Jolie testing that's commonly done during using next generation sequencing. I think it has essentially a capacity that is at least 1 billion times, that of conventional testing. How it can be best applied to COVID-19 testing is a question that many people are looking at right now. And so there are different ways people are asking. I think certainly more evidence needs to be generated in any of these 3 approaches.
Okay, that's really interesting. So definitely watch this space. We have a very interesting question from Chris Hardesty, which we will get to in a bit. But just to find a way there, you mentioned like next generation testing and all these new methods. But I suppose these are also slightly more costly. And for people who are investing in these technologies, then it becomes a question of how do you say recoup money on this? Or maybe there isn't even a profit motive once it's for the benefit of society. Like, how do you see these tests, becoming commercially viable?
I think each of these tests on a unit cost basis will actually be considerably cheaper than existing testing. Otherwise, they wouldn't sort of replace the existing state of the art. The pooling, obviously, the method to cost savings, that's clear. And that's not just cost savings, it's also supply and reagent savings, and that's very important during these times of supply chain disruptions. But I would say for each of these 3 approaches, antigen, antibody, and next generation sequencing, what we do expect is that the scale will be significantly larger than what we see today. On a per test basis, the costs would be very meaningfully lower than what is happening today as well.
Okay. Chris, so let's get to Chris' question. Chris Hardesty asks, do you foresee other measures of population health impact for the innovation beyond just normal dollar cost economics? Because the pressure now is greater than ever for R&D versus free low-cost offerings to country health systems. So it seems like there's a need to fund this research and development, but also to benefit country to be able to provide economically effective services for countries who can't really afford it, in, say, poorer economies.
Well, I'm not an economist, but I'm going to say there are two things that matter to a human, and that's health and happiness. I think today, this is a very, it's a somber period. And I'm just not even talking about economics here. I think this is everyone here in this webinar is not feeling happy because of the situation around us. And I think any effort to bring that back to normal, I think even leaving out these questions of, dollars and cents economics, I think that is something that we should be trying to do. And that is, as far as possible, efforts to restore normality. Now, the question here from a perspective of a national health system, and I don't speak for any government here, I don't speak for anyone except myself. I would say, I understand there are going to be decisions made. There's definitely resources that needs to be prioritized. I will only say that speaking as a innovator here and trying to bring technology to help, I think we definitely understand all technology will need to be assessed externally, but I think it's something which we were not that seeking to restore happiness and health. I think this is something it was not difficult to bring our team around to do, because every team member realizes the challenges of the day and the moment. And I think I foresee that at least for this period, everyone is very aligned on how to restore this as far as possible.
Yeah, definitely a big call to action at this point of time. Just kind of changing direction a little bit whilst we wait for a few more questions. So you mentioned that we earlier were talking about the need and the sense of urgency. From your experience developing SAFER alongside all the other projects that you've done, what are your top tips towards getting projects approved quickly? So we know that you want to get things moving quickly, but you also have regulation, which is also important because it prevents, I'd say, rubbish tests being out in the market. How do you negotiate this regulation? Are there ways in which we can get projects jump-started quickly, considering the circumstances that we're in and time being of the essence?
Yeah. So Henry would probably actually be a much better at describing this than me, because my perspective is that of from industry, and I'm going to just say it's a ecosystem. It's really an ecosystem, and none of us started from ground zero. It's about having, bringing together partners who are not just able to invent and develop, but also to manufacture and automate. And this is alluding to Henry's point that scale is very much a problem that, we perhaps, in Singapore, we had not, considered the size of that scale and need that dramatically. And I don't think anyone could have anticipated that 4 months ago. But today, here we are, and realizing that it does require, the academia, it does require, industry, it does require government and regulators to work effectively together. That's going to be key. And, there is definitely a role as well as, for incubators and such as catalysts, because for all bricks, there is also mortar to bind people together to get things going. not everything is going to be perfect, but the striving for the good may be more important than striving for the perfect right now. Yeah.
Oh, that's such a wise saying. Striving for the good is better than striving for the perfect. You mentioned ecosystem. It seems like leveraging on relationships, especially with regulators, also is important. Do you see that projects and the time to, say, getting research board approval, getting things onto getting projects approved for being tested or on the market, do you find that speeding up during this period?
I think and once again, I speak from the perspective of private industry. I certainly believe that regulators are very open-minded. The need and is clearly recognized that there is and there are issues out there right now. And from what I can see, and I think many technologies have been approved by the regulators to seek to address the problems of today. And a good example is the very successful Fortitude kit invented at A-Star and scaled up by DXD Hub and manufactured by a local biotech, Meraxis. I think that's gone very well, and I think that's certainly been a great demonstration of what Singapore can do. It's helping to sort of secure not just our Singapore's supply chains, but it's also helping to contribute to the region's diagnostic testing capability. And we recognize that it's not just going to be about us. Things are not going to be restored until everyone is restored, because there's a lot of mutual connections, and Singapore is connected to the rest of the world through its port, its airport as well, right? Without restoring that, life will not go back to normal.
Again, changing direction, we have another question from Wang Jiayi, who's asking about strategies for treatment or mitigation, which moves away a little bit from diagnostics. I know it would be great to have Henry here. We're still trying to get him back in. But in the meantime, any thoughts from you about treatment or mitigation? I know your focus is on testing, but any thoughts?
Understand. I think the assumption that many people have adopted is that the vaccine, of course, is the first step, the key step towards restoring the to establishing immunity. I very much hope that that day will come. I think it's going to be about invention as well as manufacturing, and these two are different problems. And I believe Singapore is playing its part in this challenge as well. I believe Duke NUS is working very hard on the vaccine, and of course, other organizations around the world are also working very hard on that vaccine. Right now, it does look like any vaccine will still be in the matter of years, not just to invent but also to develop and to deliver. So that seems to be the working assumption at this moment. I'm not an expert in this field. I'm happy to be instructed otherwise, actually.
Yeah, but that brings about many other interesting considerations in terms of coming back again to testing, which we talked about just now. I mean, if we don't have treatment or we don't have an effective vaccine, then it becomes, how do you test? How do you control the problem? Which then brings testing right to the forefront right now.
Right. So I think many people in the audience, I believe, come from a healthcare background. I would say testing in the hospital is very different from testing in the community, as Henry knows well as well. And the resolving all these technical challenges in the community, I mean, that's also the responsibility of clinicians to step up and address these difficulties. I guess everyone brings different parts of their background to this. I think an ENT surgeon could think through the best ways to obtain, the secretions. There are pathologists who definitely have technical background knowledge surrounding the analysis. I think a lot of that training, a lot of that sort of front end work, how this impacts even our current hospital training and all that, these need to be very, very quickly considered. And my background, I am trained in Singapore. I am a medical oncologist who qualified from the National Cancer Center Singapore, and I recognize that how this is going to even impact our local physician training, and that would be a question I would have to ask Paul here, which is from a personnel training, perspective, what are the new needs that are going to happen in hospitals today?
Yeah, that's a tricky question, because I think a lot of the focus has been on how regular training has been disrupted, rather than, because all this work has shifted away to COVID, as opposed to thinking about what skills clinicians need to be equipped with going forward with this in mind. I think that there must be a new emphasis on some of the more joined up thinking in terms of, like, from a systems point of view, how do you balance these COVID related disruptions with trying to go ahead with your usual clinical work. So how do you continue to treat cancers whilst needing to screen people for COVID beforehand? And I don't think we have thought through that enough yet. And I think that we need to do more thinking on that front.
Maybe all the housemen and medical officers and residents need to be trained in telemedicine. Yeah. Because this is going to go on for 3 years. That is certainly an innovation. That is certainly an opportunity, and that aligns with the topic. And I see Henry is back, actually.
Yes, as a participant, he's typing to us. We will still be working on trying to get him back on the voice, so that I'm sure he has a lot of talking which he would like to do. Oh, he's back. Oh, maybe. Okay, let's wait until he says something, and then we can ask him a question. But in the meantime, Minhan, again, sorry to put you on the spot, but if you have any experience, say, taking things overseas, because we know that it's a global problem, any insights you can give on people who, say, have an idea, might have a proof of concept, but are now thinking of working with other countries and taking this idea, beyond Singapore's borders?
All right. So I'm happy to share. I think Lucens today has offices in 4 cities. We have 2 labs, one in Palo Alto, California, that's near San Francisco. And we have a lab in Singapore. We have offices in Hong Kong, as well as in Suzhou, which is in China. In developing any idea and technology, there needs to be consideration of the first and most basic question, which is this a product or is this a service? And I think delivering a service or a product demands different people, different thinking, and different scaling. For services, this is highly regulated. Of course, we wouldn't expect that we could deliver a medical service or a new hospital in Singapore overnight. This doesn't happen. And so I would first say that it would be best if there is a new service that this be worked with established partners with a presence in the various cities that innovators want to grow in. That means that products and the manufacturing of those products is the other major alternative. And for that, one has to ask the questions of, what does it take to invent to design, to develop, and then to secure the manufacturing partner. Most often, manufacturing is outsourced to a contract manufacturer who can put this all together for you at your express instruction. This usually means that there are many regulatory paths in every city. That includes our HSA in Singapore, as well as the FDA in the United States. So I would say for any innovator who wants to bring his or her invention to market, this is the hard part. It's the part that is not glamorous. There is a lot of sweat that no one sees, but it is necessary, because without this, there is no solution to the need. Yeah.
And just to kind of read between the lines, there's no shortcut either.
This is where a strong team that has multiple skill sets here, it's really important. It's not just for every builder, you also need a seller, right? Because products don't sell themselves usually. And so in assembling a team to take a product into market, and that means, when I say the word market, it literally means a solution to a problem. That team, the motivation, the mindset, the capability, these are all considerations. It's very much like today in infectious disease, you have a team that is familiar with caring for patients with infectious disease. But perhaps in some hospitals, doctors or surgeons or medical oncologists had to be repurposed to care for, patients, right? And therefore the initial team, the background, the mindset, that's absolutely key in driving a product forward. And I think I speak only from our experience, which is that we are a cancer testing lab. We are good at what we do in terms of very sensitive testing in various markets. We supply the region, and I think we do liquid biopsy testing, which is what we are very strong at. We are publishing in the various top conferences out there. And so like many doctors who had no issues, happily standing up to the front line to help care for COVID-19 patients. Similarly, driving that product forward for COVID-19, this was something that, we found fairly straightforward in motivating our team. It's a challenge that everyone can see around us.
Okay. Sorry, got to press you a little bit harder on this. So if we as doctors don't have, and because I can totally appreciate from your answer how useful having that network is, having the expertise of, accessing regulatory approval, getting manufacturing and all these things. Would you recommend then for clinicians who have ideas to try their best to partner with industry, which might have all this expertise built up?
I'm happy to talk about how that sort of partnership can happen. I used to work in the National Cancer Center, where I collaborated with industry, and I subsequently joined A-Star, where I continue to collaborate with both industry and clinicians. And I would say that I think it's going to be a learning process for all sides. I think while it's important for all parties to sort of recognize what everyone brings to the table, I think clinicians certainly can have a very clear idea of the problems. I think also engineers also have a very clear idea of the capabilities. It's not a one-stop process where a product immediately develops. There's iteration. There is a relationship. And the more closely people work together for a longer time, the faster people can react to a situation. So I'm going to use, once again, the Fortitude kit as an example. That didn't come about overnight. That came about because the stakeholders had worked together, had built those relationships over years. And so when the problem came, they were able to mobilize very quickly. Bringing this back to us here, and I speak us as clinicians because I know I am familiar. I have been seeing patients. I still saw patients up to 3 months ago. The need is therefore for us in the clinical side to better work with, science and industry, because these are the partners that are key to solve problems together. Industry will bring scale to the table. The academia and the scientists and the A-star, they will bring the resources to try out different solutions. And I think that's something which that Catalyst can certainly help to pull together, innovators from all these organizations. It's not going to be something that happens overnight.
Okay. We are going to give everyone one last chance to ask any last burning questions that they have, and we will wrap up in a short while. I have to apologize for the technical difficulties that we've had with Dr. Henry Ho, but he has lots of things which he wants to say. He's been messaging us, and we will organize another Q&A session specifically with him, and that will come at a later date, which Catalyst will organize. But in the meantime, thank you very much, Dr. Tan. I just want to end off with a final question in the absence of any other questions from the floor, which is, wrapping all these things up together, I've definitely learned a lot about the multifaceted nature of the problem, how, as clinicians or whoever we are along this whole value chain, we can bring our own unique perspectives, and there's not just this one problem, there's all the other problems in the back end as well. But also, as you were saying, the industry bringing scale to the table, and all these networks and things which accelerate this development process. If not all of us are CEOs of companies who already have access to these direct access to all these networks. If you were to put yourself in say my shoes, or anyone of the clinicians on the floor had an idea in the shower, would like to do something about it, what would be your next steps?
So Paul, I was a clinician in the National Cancer Center. I rounded every day in Ward 48. Many of the Singapore General Hospital and the various university staff are my close friends, and we have seen patients together. So I'm familiar with the questions of what is needed. I think that the SingHealth Medical Technology Office, I think that's going to be a great sort of a organization to pull together interested people and to push for closer connections. Outside SingHealth, there are many engineers, many scientists that are very hungry to collaborate with clinicians. There is much more demand for people to talk to, for clinicians to have those conversations with. So I would say, for the clinician who has an idea, and I'm glad to talk to many clinicians like that, the best way to start is to make that idea, define the idea, search for partners in not just in SingHealth, but in our local research institutions such as NTU, NUS, and A-Star. Find the like-minded. Life is much easier when you have a like-minded partner. So I think that would be the sensible way forward. Doing it it's possible to drive an idea on your own, but you know what they always say, right? If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with partners. Go in a team.
Yep. Thank you very much, Min Han. I hope this has inspired everyone to start thinking about your own ideas, defining it, and also finding other people, like-minded people. I'm sure amongst all the participants here, there'll be a lot of like-minded people to go along with you. Do keep a lookout for the other events which Catalyst will organize. I'm sure there will be another session with Prof. Henry Ho. And yep, until next time, thank you for joining us. And thank you very much, Min Han.
Thank you. Right. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.